If you all want to find your way to First Kings, if that page hasn't fallen out of your Bible yet. Almost has. No. I can believe that.
Well, First and Second Samuel, they're gone.
They're way gone. Yeah.
My John is gone. Yeah.
Paul had sent me a little email, and at the bottom he asked me if I was in Chronicles yet. And I wrote him back and said that if he thought I was in Chronicles, he was confused as to how long he had been away. Right? And we thought he'd been away a lot longer than he had. So anyway, we are going to jump, or we can, in May, and jump over to Chronicles, because as you've seen as we go through these, they kind of parallel each other, give you a little different viewpoint on some of the same issues, and so it's often helpful to have them both up there. But this morning we're picking up where we left off in the continuing story of the nation of Israel, as we've watched them peak, and they are now on the downside slope of their height as being a nation, and a prosperous one at that. So we're at the end of Solomon. Last time we saw some adversaries that had been raised up during Solomon's reign in order to get his attention. And you'll remember that in the very prayer that he prayed at the temple dedication, Lord, when this happens, point us towards yourself, remind us of our need to confess and turn back to you. And when it happens, it just goes right on by it. And he doesn't seem to be catching the very hints that God had been sending him this whole time. So in his grace, God's saying, come on, Solomon, listen up. And by then he is so caught up in life that he seems to just totally miss the warnings that he's getting. So last time we saw a couple of foreign adversaries that popped up. You'll remember there was one from Ammon, and then another one that became probably one of his biggest sore spots up north out of Damascus. And Hadad and later Ben-Hadad, who were centered up here. And one of the things we didn't discuss, we talked about how he started out in guerrilla warfare and raiding parties we saw. But the other thing that we didn't take the time to discuss was the particular location that he chose to set up camp when he finally was able to pick a home base, if you will, and defeat that area and move in and make himself king of that city up there. What he got in the bargain that really was a blow to Solomon had to have been because of where it was. And remember, this place is a key part of what's going on in the world at that time because of the problem of the desert out here with very few routes through it. So you're forced to travel through this little piece of real estate if you're doing anything between Africa and Europe, or from over in the Arab area or to the east. All these roads, trade routes that come through this area, and if you have a toll road through your land, you get to charge a toll. And so that's surely a big part of the income for Solomon, was the trade that went through this piece of real estate he controlled. Well, what happens when you lose a place like Damascus way up here? What just happens to go through there? Well, it happens to be a key eastern trade route comes through there. And this guy, Hadad, was picking up probably a pretty hefty fare for folks to travel through there. If he's picking up the fare, guess who's not? Solomon's not picking up that fare. And there's some discussion, we saw where the next guy that became a problem is internal, and we looked at Jeroboam. We'll review him there for a minute. But one of the challenges that Jeroboam brings to Solomon is the problem of what they see, the northern tribes see, as overtaxation. Some of the commentators believe that he may very well have had to increase his taxation of his own people because some of his trade income revenue stream is being cut off at Damascus. So I don't know if that's true or whether it was how significant of a blow it may have been, but it would have been an economic as well as a military issue that Solomon had this constant problem up here that he had to deal with. So we've got these guys jabbing in from the outside, one from up there and the other one from out on the east side over here. So again, trade routes may very well have been an issue over there because there were trade routes on both sides of the Jordan, and the couple of key ones that came across through from the Tigris Euphrates. So he's really should have been feeling some pressure. And we noted that last time, I want to review that just briefly, that this is not just man's idea, but we have Ahijah who comes and meets Jeroboam on the road. And if you'll look at verse 29, let's just review that again. In fact, let's back up to 28 because Jeroboam reminds you of who he was. It says, Jeroboam was a valiant warrior, and when Solomon saw that the young man was industrious, he appointed him over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. He's a doer, he's a worker, he's sharp, he's young, he's talented, and he's a guy that catches Solomon's eye immediately. So he's somebody that if he catches the king's eye, and he's over the house of Joseph, remember, and Joseph's house is two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. And Ephraim, you remember, is significant because
The warrior tribe.
they're one of the influential, the larger tribes. The leadership for the other tribes really comes out of Ephraim, has traditionally been there, and they are a leader in the group. So the guy who's in charge of Ephraim is the guy who influences a lot of folks in those northern tribes. So he has a lot of influence there, and obviously Solomon recognizes that, puts him in charge of that area and that responsibility. So he is on his way out of town in verse 29. It says he went out of Jerusalem, and the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite found him on the road. And it says Ahijah had clothed himself in a new cloak, and both of them were alone in the field. So they meet each other out on the road. Nobody else is around, just the two of them. And one of the things I kind of passed over last time that I got reminded we need to pay attention to is those little details that just drive you nuts. Why did it bother to say he had a new cloak? Why didn't he just have a cloak?
Value.
Why was there no value? Why else would it be a new cloak?
It's like a new thing is coming on.
A new thing. In fact, a new thing exists, doesn't it? Solomon is the closest they ever come to filling God's description of the land that he's going to give them. Doesn't quite make it, but it's as close as it gets. This was the peak for the nation. And it seems that this new cloak may very well represent the fact you haven't had time to get old yet, and we've already got a problem. We came through David, we got Solomon, and boom, here we are with a new nation. And God says, even though it's a brand new cloak, it's a brand new nation, I'm going to take it and tear that thing apart. I mean, it's just to be a really gripping illustration of what God's trying to say. So he meets him and he takes this new cloak and he tears it into 12 pieces and says, you take what you want. Take it for yourself. You're Jeroboam, you're in his shoes. What's your reaction to that? Do we have any hints, any clues of what Jeroboam's reaction to that might be? Well, we do. We got a couple of things. It was right up Jeroboam's alley, for one. The interesting thing is what happens next It says, pick them out. And he says, I'm going to tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and I'm going to give you 10 tribes. You pick out the pieces you want, because I'm going to give these. And then he reminds them that I am going to keep one tribe for the sake of David. I am going to make sure that my promise to David in that covenant is not violated. However, you get the rest. Because they have forsaken me, in verse 33, they worship Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the sons of Ammon. And they have not walked in my ways, doing what's right in my sight, and observing my statutes and my ordinances, as his father David did. That is the problem, Jeroboam. And I want you to think about this. Jeroboam's getting told, you get this, I'm going to give it to you. And here's why I'm going to do it. So I want you to understand why I'm doing this. And here's my promise then to you. It says, after he's, verse 34 again, I'm not going to take the whole kingdom. I'm going to make him Solomon. And he says Solomon will be a ruler all the days of his life. So Solomon's going to get to keep it his life, and then you get it. You catch that? For the sake of my servant David, whom I chose, who observed my commandments and my statutes. It's not because of Solomon and what he's done, but due to my promise to David. And I am going to take the kingdom from his son's hand, from Solomon's son's hand, and I'm going to hand it to you. Wow. You're going to get it. And then he says, if you'll listen, verse 38, I'll jump you down there for a moment. Well, 37. I will take you, Jeroboam, and you shall reign over whatever you desire, and you shall be king over Israel. Then it will be that if you listen to all I command you, and walk in my ways, and do what is right in my sight, by observing my statutes and my commandments, as my servant David did, then I will be with you, and build you an enduring house, as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. Thus I will afflict the descendants of David for this, but not always. Now, you're Jeroboam, and what did you just get told?
You're going to get to be king.
You're going to get to be king. You can pick out for yourself whatever you want. I think in that was an understanding that Jeroboam already had ambitions for leadership within. It doesn't say that, and maybe I'm out on a limb a little, but I see in Jeroboam somebody who was looking for an opportunity.
Well, he demonstrated his leadership by the position that was given to him and responsibility.
Yep. He has huge responsibility for serving Solomon and over the house of Joseph. Influential position. He's been noticed surely by lots of other folks. And he says, you get it, but how do you get it? There are two things, he said. First of all, I'm not going to take it away from Solomon. Because of my promise to David, Solomon gets it all the days of his life, and when he dies, I'm going to take it away from his son, and I'm going to give it to you. And only one thing I ask of you, there's a condition on that to keep it. You walk in my ways, unlike what Solomon did. You walk in my ways, and I will build for you a house that will endure. What a deal to somebody who has aspirations to leadership and all that sort of thing. Did he accept the deal is the question. Or did he say, I want it my way? Our clue is in what happens towards the end. In verse 40. Solomon sought therefore to put Jeroboam to death, but Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt. And he was in Egypt till the death of Solomon. Our first clue is right there. Part of it could just be jealousy on the part of Solomon, because word gets back to him about something. I mean, there was nobody else out there. So the only way Solomon could have found out about it is if God told him, which it doesn't tell us he did or did not, or somehow Jeroboam either let the cat out of the bag and word got back, or Jeroboam did something to make it clear that he had aspirations to have a rebellion against Solomon. And a lot of commentators are really lean towards the direction of the reason Solomon sought to kill him is because he had provoked some kind of revolt within the land. And the reason you can say that as well is it tells us that God raises up these adversaries for Solomon, and Jeroboam's one of them. So what that tells you, he got handed this thing. God says, here it is, and Jeroboam's response to that is, I want it now, and I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to do it when I want. I'm not willing to wait on God to deliver on his promise. Do you see that in him? Personally ambitious, and allows his own ambitions to overrule what's God's hand in him, and really a lack of total faith in God that he's going to do what he said he's going to do. So really interesting guy, Jeroboam. And Jeroboam, you will see, with all his problems, is a much smarter guy than Rehoboam. He is way ahead of Rehoboam. And that's the next part of the story. As Solomon passes away, and now we have Rehoboam, his son, reigning in his place. So, what do we know about Rehoboam? Is he young guy, old guy? We happen to know that he's probably close to 40 years old. In fact, he might be 42.
Right, because in Israel, you weren't considered a man until you were 40. I mean, as far as given position or leadership or anything.
And we know that Solomon had children when he started his ministry. The other thing that's interesting, and I actually had one commentator said they think he might have been his only son, and I'm thinking, that's a long shot. That is a long shot. I don't know. But you think about Solomon had wives, concubines, and everything. All of those could have technically been somewhere in line for the
He had his
throne.
own kingdom,
Yeah.
had his own, yeah.
So this guy, he is handpicked by his father, probably. Or at least he's in the position where dad needs to go with him. How bright did his dad think Rehoboam was? How do we know? Do we have any clues? Some of the men have been attending Men of Steel.
Your Proverbs,
Yeah.
all these warnings to
Seek wisdom and all those kind of things.
Yeah. When you go through Proverbs, there's a whole bunch of them about sluggards. There's a whole bunch about inappropriate ambition and waiting on the Lord, and a whole bunch of things about wisdom and attaining it and using it. And all of us have been wrestling with those things in Men of Steel as we've gone through the book of Proverbs, or how many years now we've been working through that. It's a long time. When was that written, and to whom, you have to wonder. Well, we know Solomon's spiritual condition started out, and he started out at a high plane at the beginning of his reign, and we know by the end of his term, he is in idolatry. So the best guess is that somewhere up in here, before he totally went off the deep end into the direction his wives told him, he wrote this. His son would have been a young man.
Just a question, where do you think Ecclesiastes was written?
My personal feeling is that it was
Yeah.
down here somewhere. And the question that still remains back here, does Ecclesiastes reveal a guy that got clear down here and went, oh no, I really missed the boat? Or does Ecclesiastes really show a guy that totally recognizes how badly he missed the boat? He realizes that life is vanity of vanities, it's all chasing after wind. But does he really totally grasp the alternative that isn't vanity? And sometimes there's hints of, the best thing is for this, but does he really turn the corner? I'm not sure.
Sometimes it sounds really cynical.
Yeah, sometimes it's just, the best you can do is
Right.
So I don't know, it's all in how you read it, and there's people on both sides of that argument as to which way it went. So somewhere between his beginning up here with his father David's mentoring, even though David had his own problems, somewhere between that and this just sparkling beginning where he says, God, I just need your wisdom. Give me what I need to rule your people. Somewhere between that and the miserable old age that he describes in Ecclesiastes, where nothing works and you can't hear and you can't see and you can't walk and all that stuff. Somewhere in between here, it almost looks like he's recognizing an up and coming king that's really going to run into a wall if he doesn't get it. And it appears that many of the Proverbs may have been addressed towards a son that's headed for a wreck.
That's what I was gonna say, that how many times in Proverbs do you read, my son, my son, my son?
Yeah. Is this the son? Is this the guy? You have to wonder if this is the guy. And then you look at Rehoboam as he's revealed to us here in his opening debut. First thing is that Rehoboam went to Shechem. Does anybody go, wait a minute, Shechem, why there?
That's no-
Because where is he right now? Here's Jerusalem down here. And Jerusalem is what?
the temple.
It's the temple is there, the palace is there, the center of government is there, everything that's anything of importance in the nation is there, right? So why would you go all the way up here to Shechem to be made king?
Show who's in charge.
Yeah.
Did
Well,
he have grandparents then, or did he have mother?
I don't know that he did.
Okay.
But it is an interesting place. It sits in the little dip between two mountains and two humps is the way it looks to me, but I guess it's mountains, they call them. And it's been a significant place for others to have been recognized as king there, so maybe there's some historical reason to do it. It happens to be in Ephraim.
It's in the kind of the center of Israel.
It's in the center of Israel, and in particular in Israel, as we see things. Here is Judah, and here is Israel, as we will come to know them. And it is up in the center of business there, and it's going to become a significant spot in there. The question in mind is, does he go there because he wants to go there and it's a political maneuver on purpose? Does he go there because he needs to go there? It says he went for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. And my question I can't seem to get answered is, in that term when they say Israel, do they mean all Israel here? Or do they mean all of the nation? Because it's usually, we've seen, they start out differentiating early on between Israel and Judah. So there's a possibility that it was necessary to go there in order for Israel, the northern tribes, to recognize him.
Isn't Jeroboam got control of that area and he's
Well, that's
at that time?
that's an interesting thing, because right as this, just up until this time, Jeroboam is down here. Jerry's down there. For obvious reasons, in that he didn't want to lose his head. So he has fled down there, but it tells us in verse 2, and right around that time, then Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, for he was yet in Egypt, for he had fled from the presence of King Solomon while he was living in Egypt. They sent and called him. Who's they? Does he have people? His people called him.
Which makes me wonder, when he first fled because Solomon got wind of it, how did Solomon get wind of it? Did the prophet tell Solomon also? I mean,
Exactly. Did word get out, or
Jerry
did
all of a sudden
he?
go back and say, hey, everybody, guess what I just heard?
Yeah.
And all the people follow him, or?
Or did he go in and raise up his folks and try to do a rebellion, and Solomon went after him because he tried to revolt.
Yeah. Well, verse 27 in chapter 11 says, here's the account of how he rebelled against King Solomon.
Yeah, so thank you. So we've got a rebellion against King Solomon. We've got a rebellion going on.
Don't you think maybe, where Jeroboam, or excuse me, Rehoboam went up there, he was trying to lay claim and maybe before the other man came in, he's trying to usurp that and say, well, you know, I'm gonna be king over everything,
Everybody.
I'm Solomon's son and everything, et cetera. So he was trying to deflate maybe this Jerry down here.
Could be an effort to unify what's becoming fractured. Obviously, Jeroboam probably wasn't the only person stirring up trouble or causing some friction. We've seen it clear back in David's reign. Do you remember when David came back after Absalom finally got put down? And he came back and we had a big flap right at the Jordan River. And in fact, a similar cry that we will have heard to your necks, O Israel. And David had to put down a revolt at that time. So going way back, there's been a little friction between the brothers. Not everybody's been happy with Judah maintaining the scepter. Some of them thought they should. And Ephraim has been a key player in that all the way along. So the politics and the family feud, things like that are going on here, when you start looking at some of the hints are really fascinating. The question is, of course, so what? We still got to deal with the so whats, and why did God record this? Why did he show us this? And we'll have to talk about that. But at least I want you to start to get some of the hints, if we don't know all the details, just to realize that this is real. It's just like what happens on your newspaper, the competition between leaders and for power, for all those things that happen in the world today is happening right here. And you know Egypt's maneuvering. Why are they harboring him? Hey, they're looking ahead.
Back to this feuding, that goes clear back to Israel saying to Moses,
Yeah.
why are you any better than anybody else? How come you're a leader? You know,
Yeah.
somebody else could be leader.
Yeah,
So,
why do we want to follow you?
and the same thing with Ephraim says, did
Yeah.
God do right by naming Judah? You know,
Right.
why not us?
Yeah. Is there a chip on Ephraim's shoulder because our great-great-grandfather Joseph got packed up and sent to Egypt? Do we have a chip? Who was it that sold him into slavery? You know, that goes way back. An own brother. So we got some issues floating around in the family that are still hanging out there. And they're human beings, just like all of us. And the old sin natures are working. And you can see it playing out here and on an international scale. You got people up here now, they're looking at this place. You got these folks down here, and not too distant future, we're going to pull in some more from over here. So everybody's looking at the gold mine here. They're looking for pieces of it. So we've got Rehoboam going up there. Jeroboam now knows what's going on, and they sent and called him. And so they all gathered up. Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam. Okay, Jeroboam's their spokesman now. Comes out of exile and they move in. They have a big powwow. It's just like the international powwow going on in Chicago, only this one is within the nation. They've got everybody there, the leaders of all the tribes. They're there for supposedly the purpose of saying Rehoboam's going to be our king. That's what Rehoboam's got his eye on. And they called him in and said, here is our problem, Rehoboam. Your father made our yoke hard. Therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. So, how do you make their yoke hard? Well, we talked about taxes, probably.
Yeah, and that Milo or whatever that he
There was the
had them
issue
put
of the
together.
Milo. That still people are debating about what that was, but appears to have been a large construction project. And how
Manpower.
manpower, so. And he'd been doing that before. He did that for the temple and everything. People came in and had to work their month on the project and then back to the farm and that sort of thing. We've done that before. Why would that be a problem now? Are we used to that idea?
Maybe they weren't doing that then. Were they still doing that? Were they still doing that monthly thing, or
Sure
did he
sounds that
just-
way. What
Okay.
was his responsibility? Jeroboam's?
They did forced labor.
Head of the forced labor. And when you read Ecclesiastes, one of the things we talked about, we looked at, what was it that Solomon decided to do because he could do it? Engineering projects, building projects, fortifying cities, building all these waterways and all these projects that he
Which
wanted.
also are lasting monuments to his name.
That- Oh, surely that was just a secondary benefit.
Might as well throw himself.
I mean, he wanted to-
He worshiped.
Do something, you know. Well, how do you do that? It's great to be an engineer and be a genius, but can one guy build them? No, you need manpower. In those days, they didn't have D8s and D9s. You needed physical bodies to move rocks. And you need lots of them. You can use so many slave laborers, and then you got to have some manpower. So these folks are feeling the pinch on both fronts. Because when the manpower is gone, what happens to your own economy? Who does the harvest? Who's going to take care of the livestock? The key guy is gone. So they're feeling this pull very likely because some of the external pressures that are on them as well. Did they lose some forced labor over here with that revolt and maybe with this one, as well as the economic impacts and any military things? Possibly. I don't know. So you got to look at the picture and say, yeah, they probably had a legitimate right. The pressure's on. So now Rehoboam's got to make a choice. And here's where we get to see another little insight into Rehoboam. And what kind of a guy he was, what makes him tick. And what's going on in his head. It says here that he told them wisely, depart for 3 days and return to me. Smart? Excellent idea. Let me consult folks, let me think about it, we'll process that. You come back and we'll give you an answer. And it's not like the Wizard of Oz where the wizard says, go away, you know, bring me back the broom or whatever it is, you know. Just get out of my hair because I don't want to have to deal with it. So then he consults, probably wisely, with the elders who had served his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, how do you counsel me to answer these people? They must have read Proverbs. The soft answer turns away wrath, I think it is. They spoke to him saying, if you will be a servant to this people today, will serve them, grant them their petition, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. Does that sound like somebody that writes political advertisement? You could do that for any candidate for an office. Tell the people you'll give them what they want. Good advice, right? Would it have worked? You don't know. But it would have been at least a soft answer back saying, I want to be a king that serves my people and is concerned about them. So from that standpoint, it's probably a good answer. And then he said, you know, I think I want a second opinion. And he called, it says he forsook the counsel of the elders, which they had given him. They walked away from those old guys that had been around a while. And he consulted with the young men who grew up with him and served him. So who grew up with him?
These are his cronies, his yes men.
Ah,
They'll tell him what he wants to hear.
surely not. Yes, ma'am.
Either that or they Occupy Wall Street people. They think they know everything.
Yeah. You think of these people he grew up with. Who did he grow up with?
His brothers.
May have been other brothers or something that were pulled into the leadership thing. Close friends due to what? Offices they fathers
All
held?
of them had a certain amount of power in their own little area.
Probably.
and everything, and
Yep, they probably all had a share of the government and the pay that came from being a government employee, ambassador, whatever.
And they're all a bunch of selfish people who have had too much Where have we seen that before?
What makes you think that they would be that way? I can't imagine. So these young guys, these young, smart, up-and-coming leaders gather up with him, and here's the reply. Here's the counsel. Is, what do you tell me? When they say lighten the yoke in verse 9, and here's their answer in verse 10. The young men who grew up with him spoke to him, saying, Thus you shall say to this people who spoke to you, saying, Your father made our yoke heavy, now make it lighter for us. But you speak to them, My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. Whereas my father loaded you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. Whoa! What does that sound like? Stupid, yeah. That comes to mind, doesn't it? What mindset says this is a good answer? What is he thinking of himself? How is he viewing his position when he gives this answer?
Dictators.
He's going to please himself and these guys.
The flesh answering,
Flesh answering back.
Yeah.
Well, what else is he assuming? He's just taking a big, huge assumption right here.
Thinks his power is infinite.
That he can back